Welcome back, and today we are continuing with with our discussion on Plato's Meno. And today in this lecture, we will continue our study of Plato's Meno. And here today, especially, we will be discussing more in depth into some of the key questions which Meno tries to question, and some of the key issues and concerns raised by Plato's Meno. You see, one of the key themes and the central theme of Plato's Meno, this dialogue, is on virtue. Now, the issue is, how does, you may ask now, that how does it relate to, i.e., the issue of virtue? How does the issue of virtue relate to politics? You see, we will try to connect this because last time I gave you a brief summary. I gave you a precis or a gist of the dialogue, the literally the summary of the dialogue between Plato and Meno. And if you remember, and if you have not, I suggest that you go back and rewatch the video lecture. You see, in Meno, Plato brings up this theme of virtue, and it may baffle us because we are dealing with issues of political philosophy, and you may wonder why virtue is essential to politics. Now, in this lecture, I'll try to connect both virtue and politics together. But before we do that, you must remember that it is imprudent, it is quite unsound to directly convey to the reader, convey to the listener how they are connected, because it cannot be done that way. And it was by design, which we have to remember that whenever you read Plato, you will never find a direct connection. You'll have to find the connections yourself. Much in the same way, some of the key answers to the major concepts such as justice or truth or virtue in Plato's politics is not something that Plato will give, and it is by design that he wants us to realize what they are. You see, the reason why, like I mentioned previously, the reason why you will never find the answer is because, you see, even in Plato's Meno, the key question about whether virtue can be taught or not, right? Or in other words, what virtue is never directly answered. They very indirectly deal with virtue in the sense that can it be taught? The answer was no, it cannot be taught. However, that leaves a greater unanswered question, and that question is, what is virtue then? Right? What is virtue? We understand that virtue cannot be taught. It is not teachable. However, what is virtue? Right? In other words, the question which Plato's Meno have answered, i.e., you cannot teach a person to be virtuous, it is incomplete. It is incomplete precisely because we do not know, and Plato does not deal with this in Meno, we do not know what virtue is. In the sense that you will find later on when we deal with Plato's Republic, he gives us some insights into what it may mean. However, in terms of this dialogue, Meno, he does not deal with the issue of what virtue is, and that's very interesting. You see, just because you must remember that just because something is not dealt with in the book, it does not mean that it is not important. You see, what you do is this. What I want you to keep in mind whenever you read great thinkers and philosophers such as Plato or Socrates or Aristotle is that things which are not dealt with are very, very important. Nowadays, if you don't deal with it, you essentially assume that it is unimportant. However, in terms of these thinkers, you must realize that things which are not dealt with are very, very important. Right? It is something that we have to seek. It is something that we have to inquest upon, and hence try to formulate our own answers Of course, when I say formulate our own answers, I do not mean that it is your uncritical opinion about things. Rather, when Plato wants you to search and seek answer within yourself, it wants you to question the very core of your being, the very core of those beliefs and norms which you hold to be very, very dear to you, those values which you have made which you have made it as part of the very essence of you. You see, you must question those things. And so, coming back to the issues of manner, you see, on the issue of virtue, the questions raised in Meno are not fully answered, and it is only answered ambiguously, right? It's only answered ambiguously whenever Plato tells us that it is only through deeds. Virtue, you can, in other words, you see, virtue can be you can talk a lot about virtue, what virtue is. You can say virtue is justice, virtue is knowledge. Obviously, from the conversation with Plato's Meno, we find that virtue is not knowledge, right? Virtue is not just or whatnot, but in the essence of it. You see, you can talk a lot about what virtue is. Virtue is this, virtue is that, blah blah blah. Regardless of what you say, those are incomplete, and they are precisely incomplete because there is no deed. It is only through action that you become virtuous. Of course, you will know what that means when we deal with Aristotle. So, but nevertheless, it is important to keep in mind that what Plato is trying to convey to us is that virtue is not essentially complete if there is no deed. You can talk a lot about things, however, if you don't do it in action, then it literally means nothing. So that is precisely the point of Plato. And you see, the reason why, and I urge you to pay attention to this, and I urge you to note this down, and very, very essential for your it will serve as an important guidance throughout your life. And the issue is this. You see, Socrates, or Plato's Socrates, does not present the ultimate truth, right? He, in his work, in Plato's work, and even if you read Socrates is obviously what we know of Socrates is through Plato and Xenophon and Aristophanes. However, whenever you do read Plato's Socrates or Plato or in general, is that you will never find them present the truth or the ultimate answer to the question which they are dealing with. In other words, you will never find Plato saying, this is virtue, this is the truth, this is the good, this is the beautiful, this is the knowledge, this is the wisdom, ultimate wisdom, whatnot. You will never find Plato present to us the ultimate something, the ultimate truth or whatnot. However, he will enable, right? He enables us, right? He implicitly enables, like say for instance, the attentive reader, an astute reader or a listener, and only to that reader to find it for ourselves. Right? In other words, ultimately, I'll give you the answer. You see, ultimately for Plato, the only way to knowing the truth, the only way of knowing the ultimate answer to the truth or wisdom or knowledge or beautiful or good, is that you can only achieve that only through philosophizing, right? Philosophy. In other words, when we think of philosophy, you may think of a boring subject with boring concepts, which is very difficult to comprehend. However, the thing is, what he means by philosophy or philosophizing is that it's not something that you must read all those boring books and try to comprehend those boring concepts. Rather, it only means to think and understand. That's very simple. Because what is philosophy? Philosophy in the Greek word Sophia, is the love of wisdom, right? So in other words, when Plato urges the reader, the attentive reader and the astute reader, that the only answer to knowing the ultimate truth to things of wisdom and virtue and whatnot is only through philosophizing. And by philosophizing, Plato means to think and to understand. Because in most of our lives, most of the beliefs that we hold to be true, we hold it uncritically. We do not think we have not thought things true, right? We do not understand them properly. In other words, say for instance, I hold certain beliefs right? But then if I actually think about it, much of what I believe is passed on to me by my parents, by my grandparents, and I have accepted them uncritically. I've just point blank, blindly, in a sense, blindly just hold those values without thinking what they are, what they truly are, and not even asking myself, do I truly understand that? You see? So these are the things, this is the only way, according to Plato, that you can understand and that you can truly comprehend what wisdom is. Not wisdom, but virtue is, or justice is. So in other words, when Plato says philosophy, you can only get it through philosophy. You can only understand the ultimate answer. You can only get the answer to what virtue is and get to know what virtue is. It's only through philosophizing. And when he says philosophizing, in other words, to think and understand. And what is to think and understand? To think and understand is to come up with your own answer, to come up with the answers ourselves, right? That is the only way. You think for yourself and you try to understand, and then you try to come up with the answer of what virtue may be or what justice may be, right? And that's why whenever you do read Plato, and I'm sure you have read, and for those who have read it, you'll find that in most of Plato's and Socrates, and even Aristotle, the answers are insufficient, especially in Plato and Socrates, the answers to a question is insufficient, right? It is given in insufficient clarity, and it is done so with the intended, because those were intended to be so. Because most of the plays, most of the dialogues of Plato are are instructive, right? They are meant to persuade you, right? They are protracted plays. They are protracted dialogues. In other words, they are meant to instruct us and persuade us. In other words, to drive us forward towards something such as virtue. In other words, by reading those dialogues, what Plato wants us to know is that whenever you read Meno or the Republic or the Apology, right, is that, and so many plays, is that when you read it or when you listen to it or whatnot, it should drive you forward towards something that is much greater than yourself, i.e., towards a better understanding of virtue or justice or truth or good or wisdom and so forth. So much in the same way, later we will talk about this more in detail when we turn to Plato's Republic. So for instance, in Plato's Republic, Plato's Socrates provides the best form of government, i.e., the rule by the philosopher king. However, the thing is this: if you are uncritical reader, if you're just reading for the sake of reading it with no sense of awe and trying to understand anything, and if you're uncritical about so many things, then you would blindly accept what Plato is saying. Plato mentions philosopher king, and that is exactly what he means, blah blah blah. But then, if you are an attentive reader, if you are an astute reader and listener, and if you are a critical thinker, then you would realize that, does Plato really mean that the philosopher king is the best form of governance? Does he really mean what he says it means? Does it really sound and look as the way it sounds and it looks? Because there is something which Plato may be saying something, but then we don't understand this because he's too smart, he's full of wisdom, hence we are too foolish to not even understand the subtleties involved when he says philosopher king, or society should be ruled by philosopher king, right? I hope you're getting this point, because this is quite essential that you realize what it is. So in other words, what in all of these Platonic dialogues or writings of Plato is that Plato uses Socrates, right? He uses Socrates in an attempt to guide us, right? He's trying to guide us toward a good life, right? He's trying to instruct us. He's trying to persuade us. He's trying to drive us forward towards the good life, towards what is good for us. Because in many sense, because we just believe whatever is given to us point blank, sometimes we don't know what is good for us. We may unknowingly, and that's why the importance of knowledge, what Socrates was mentioning. That's, we may unknowingly do things which are really harmful for us. We may think it is good for us, but in reality it is not good for us. And it falls upon us to realize that what we are doing is not good for us, and hence move away from it. Right? Now you can apply that in your own personal life, and also you can apply that in politics. You see, in your own personal life, there may be some things which you may unknowingly do things which are not good for you. But then, if you are introspective enough, if you retrospect, or if you introspect, if you examine yourself deeply, then you come to the realization that maybe what I'm doing is not good for me. Hence, I should stop doing it. And if I stop doing those things, then maybe things will get better for me. Right? Things will work out well for me. Much in the same way, even in politics, the same thing applies. You may think that the form of government you have now is good for you, or how politics is carried out is good for you, or that how, for instance, because we are in tribal society in Nagaland, how the tribal system of hierarchy, the tribal system of way of doing things may be good for you. But then if you think carefully, you may realize that it is not good for us. It is not good for the society. Right? You may start thinking that. You may start realizing those things. You see, so much in the same way, it is essential that you read those things. Here, the ultimate purpose of reading Plato, right, of reading Plato's Meno, or whenever we do read the Republic, you will come to the realization that Plato is not trying to tell us this is good, this is bad. He's only guiding us, right? And this is very essential for you to know, that he is guiding us. He's trying to show us and instruct us and drive us towards a better life. When I say a better life, I don't mean the material sense, but I mean in a good way, in a virtuous sense, in an ethical sense. Hence it becomes all the more essential that you understand Plato in that point, from that perspective, not otherwise. And so when Plato talks about virtue, right, in Meno, they dissect, or they deal with the question of what virtue is by dealing indirectly, i.e., can it be taught? And the answer was no, it cannot be taught. You cannot teach a person how to be virtuous, right? And I will get into that more in detail later, but for now that is what it is. In other words, they deal with the issue of virtue indirectly by asking, can it be taught? And the answer was no, it cannot be taught. But then, even if you answer the question, can it be taught, the more essential question about what virtue is still remain unanswered, right? The question of what is virtue is still unanswered in Meno, and it will remain so in the rest of his writings, in Plato's writing, right? So then the issue is, why not? Why did Plato not deal with the issue of virtue directly, right? It is because, you see, it is very essential for you to know the character with whom Socrates was having this dialogue with, right, in Plato's Meno. Meno, he was, like I said, he was from the previous lecture, he was from Thessaly, right? He was from an aristocratic family. He was very, very ambitious, and he was very ambitious, very how do I say it? He knows his way around how to deal with politics, like literally cutthroat politics. And for him, there's no such thing as dedication to something higher than yourself, right? As long as he becomes famous, and as long as he does something for his own selfish gain, he will do it. He will betray his own city state, he will betray his own allies in order to enrich himself. Not enrich, but make himself more important, right? Attain some sort of importance in status in life. So he was, in other words, Socrates saw, right? Socrates saw in Meno someone who could never understand what virtue is. Even if you try to tell him what virtue is, you will never find it. And it is important, not that you'll never find it, but you will never be able to teach Meno how to be virtuous, right? That's why he never deals with Meno what virtue is. Rather, he only deals with the question of, can it be taught? Which was ultimately raised by Meno himself. Why? Because Meno thought to himself that maybe I'm a virtuous person. In his own way, he In his own ignorance, he thought that he himself to be a very virtuous person, and that he knows a lot about virtue. But in reality, he has no idea what virtue is, because he's blinded by ambition, right? He's blinded by ambition, and hence he has no idea what virtue is in the first place. Hence, Socrates and Plato himself, he never deals with Plato. Socrates does not deal with Meno what virtue is. You see, because there is no point trying to tell and convince Meno that I can teach you how to be virtuous, or you are even capable of knowing what virtue is. Because there are, and you see, this is quite true even in the world today. There are some sort of people whom you can never teach them what, say for instance, what it means to be spiritual, or what it means to be religious, what it means to believe in something, what it means to have a sense of beauty, a sense of good, right? Why? Because these kind of people are so blinded by ambition, by self-ambition, that nothing else, right? For them, nothing else matters. Nothing is as important as their ambition. For them, everything else is secondary. The most important thing is their ambition, and hence they will never, even if you try to hammer it into their heads, right, what good is, what virtue is, they will never learn what it is. And they are not just that they will never learn, but also they are, and I repeat, they are incapable. They are absolutely not capable of learning what it is. You see? So that's why, you see, this is very, very interesting, right? Because Socrates is no fool, right? Plato is no fool. Socrates is no fool. They can see right through a person, right? They can see if you are a genuine person or not. And that's why Socrates never deals with Meno, precisely because Meno is incapable. He is incapable of learning not just learning, but he is incapable of understanding. He is understanding what virtue is. If you are incapable to even understand what virtue is, then what's the point of even talking about it? And that is exactly what Socrates did. He did not discuss with Meno what virtue is. He simply said, well, whatever, can be taught, we'll stick with that. And he says, no, it cannot be taught. In other words, this was, like I said, he's very smart. Like I said, Socrates is trying to implicitly tell Meno that you are not capable of virtue, right? You are not. You may talk about it, you think that you know about it, but in reality you have no clue what you are. You have no idea what you think you have no idea about things which you think that you know, right? In other words, you don't know what you talk about. You don't know what you claim to know about. You see, that's a very indirect way of saying, yeah, you're stupid. Obviously, right? Who would like it if you say, oh yeah, in their faces, yeah, you're kind of stupid, you screwed up there, right? So that's what it is. In other words, for Socrates, he saw in Meno that something is missing, right? Something is lacking, something of depth. In other words, Plato's Socrates, he saw in Meno that something is missing, right? Something is lacking. And that was what? What was missing? So for Plato Socrates, he found that Meno lacks this love of noble, the love of the beautiful, right? In the Greek term, it's called the kalon. It's called kalon, right? The love of the beautiful, the love of the right way would be the love of noble, something noble. And what do we mean by noble? Right? What do we mean by noble? When I say noble, by noble it means when you possess or when you have or acquire these fine qualities, right? When I say fine qualities, you mean literally a fine qualities, or possessing someone who possesses or who has acquired a high moral principles, something magnificent, right? Something good and excellent, right? When we say noble, it means excellent or superior qualities, right? When we say qualities, I mean like moral principles or something good, personal characteristics, right? Like ethics or ethical, or like being truthful, being just, being good, and being wise, and being caring, being sympathetic, or being understanding. All these things are good qualities, are fine qualities, are excellent qualities, for a person to possess. Those are some high moral principles, and that's what noble means. In other words, what Socrates was trying to tell Meno was that, right? What Plato's Socrates was trying to tell Meno was that, you see, I cannot answer, or I cannot have a conversation with you regarding what virtue is, precisely because you are incapable to learn what virtue. You are incapable, you are incapable to even understand. You are incapable to understand what virtue is. And because you are incapable to learn what virtue is, right, it cannot be taught to you. Furthermore, the reason why it is incapable for you to understand what virtue is because you lack, or there's something missing in you. And what is missing in you, Meno? This love for beautiful, the love for the beauty, the love for the noble, right? Kalon, right? The love for possessing. In other words, there are some people who above all else would prefer to possess for themselves, to acquire, right? To have an excellent moral principle, an excellent personal quality, something magnificent, right? Something magnificent personal quality, such as wisdom and knowledge and just and be wise and be caring and be sympathetic and be understanding. And this is given by the fact, and this is point blank, it's very easy to understand why this is so, because you see, in the dialogue, in one of the dialogues, I mean not in one dialogue, in the dialogue, if you have read carefully in Meno, you find that as Plato was trying to ask Meno, give me one simple, one common thing, one common theme that is present in all the various virtues that you have mentioned, something which is common to all. Meno, in one point in time, he says, well, virtue can be something beautiful, right? He says virtue can be something beautiful, i.e., something noble and beautiful. Yeah, but then when Meno brings up beautiful in his definition, Socrates immediately replaces the word kalon, or like noble or beautiful, with the word called good, right? Something good. And Meno is not even aware of this change made by Socrates. You see, you get the point? And the reason why Meno is not even aware of this change from beautiful, from beautiful and noble to good, is that he does not even care. In other words, he really does not care about virtue. If he did care about virtue, then he would have said, wait Socrates. I said beautiful, I said noble, I did not say good. But then Socrates changed Meno's definition of beautiful and noble to good. And Meno is not even aware of the change made by Socrates, right, in the discussion. You see, because the thing is, because he is too ambitious, right? Nothing else matters. For everything else is secondary, right? Everything else is secondary. Those things does not matter to him, precisely because he does not care about virtue, what virtue is. And Aristotle was, and Plato, Socrates was right to implicitly tell Meno that, yeah, you know what, you are incapable to understand what virtue is. And there's the proof, right? And there's a proof as to why Meno is incapable to understand what virtue is. You see, because it says a lot about a person with a sense of humor also, and if you have read carefully, you will even find this. You see, one essential thing about Plato's Socrates is this. He pays a lot of attention to the sense of humor as well. You see, the sense of humor. In other words, a person's sense of humor tells a lot about that person. I truly believe that, because you see, in the dialogue, and later on when we read Plato's Republic, we will also come to realize what it is. The thing is this: people who don't have a good sense of humor are really distracted with something in life, something ambitious, I suppose. But I mean, obviously, just because they're ambitious, it does not mean that they will achieve or attain what they are striving for, right? It's actually bad for them if they don't have good sense of humor, right? And it is signified, and this lack of sense of humor, is 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 indicated to us in Plato's Meno by this absence of laughter, right? Laughing. You find that throughout this dialogue, Plato's Meno, you don't find Meno laughing, right? You don't find Meno laughing, and that says a lot about that person. See, you may ask, why is that so important? Why is laughing? Why is the character laughing so important to Plato's Socrates? And the reason is this: laughter suggests some sort of inner freedom, right? It suggests some sort of freedom, this inner freedom, which has to do with the love of the noble, love of beautiful, love of noble, right? But then you don't find this in Meno. And later on, when we do talk about, when we turn to the Republic, you find that even one of the characters, Adimandus, right? Even he does not laugh. Throughout the dialogue, throughout the book, the Republic, you'll never find Adimandus laughing. On the other hand, you'll find Glacon, right, whom we have dealt with in Socrates. You find him laughing. You see, and the reason is because they do not laugh because they are concerned with other things, right? These characters, such as Meno and later on in the Republic, Adimandus, they are concerned with other things, such as what? Getting rich and powerful, right? For them, because getting rich and powerful is their primary aim, they don't even have time, even a second to spare, right? Laughing about. They don't have time. They don't find it funny. They don't find it good. There's no freedom. In other words, they are caged in their own ambition, right? That limits them, that cages them, that puts them into prison, that cages them from seeing the truth, from seeing the ultimate truth, from seeing the banalities of life to the beauty of life, right? Everything else. And in the conversation in Meno, you'll not find Meno laughing at all. You see, that's why it's very essential to realize that sometimes we should not let our ambition limit us, because our ambitions can be can hamper us more than it will help us. And in most cases, they don't help us at all, actually, right? So, okay, getting back to the issue, you see, what he means to tell Meno was that because you are so distracted, because you are caged, imprisoned by your own ambition to get rich and powerful, you don't see, there's no point even trying to make you understand, and you will not understand what virtue is. Because you see, the reason why you cannot teach them what virtue is because, you see, virtue is something related to what is known as prudence, right? Prudence. It is more or less like when you may find that in the dialogue, as Plato Socrates is having conversation with Meno, you will find that Socrates all of a sudden brings up something about the issue of the soul, right? The immortality of the soul. In other words, the existence of soul, right? And the reason is because, and you'll understand this, and the reason why he brings up the issue of the soul is because virtue is something like the right order of the soul. In other words, you must just like you must arrange your house properly, just like you must put your house in order first. In other words, first you must put your family in order. In other words, if there's some sort of unresolved issues within the family, it's not good. Hence, you must first arrange those things, right, for the betterment of everybody. So it's like that. So virtue is something related to the ordering of the soul, right? In other words, you put them into order. You correct your soul. You correct your inner being, right? Because to know virtue, right? In other words, to understand what virtue is, it assumes, or it presupposes, right? It assumes that you have the knowledge of your soul. In other words, the knowledge of your soul would mean, the best way to make you understand what it means, the soul, is that your inner self. I mean, he does not mean that, but I think for the sake of clarity and for the sake of less cloud regarding the issue of the soul, you can say that when Plato Socrates is speaking about the soul, by that he means your inner being. You must put them in order. You must know who you are. You must, you must resolve all those conflicting passions and interests within you. Right? You must put them into order, because in order to truly understand what virtue is, you must possess, or you must have. At first, you must know the knowledge of your own soul. In other words, you must know yourself first, right? That's why the famous dictum of Socrates, know thyself. That is written even in almost all the important religious texts. Even in Christian, it says, know yourself. That's very important. In other words, know your inner self, who you are, right? You must not only, in order to truly be virtuous, so Socrates is telling Meno, you must not only know the nature of yourself, but you must also know what the parts of yourself, right? Those various parts of your own self, right? And then put those differentiated, very separate parts into order, right? Put them into order, arrange them properly, and then you will understand what virtue is. Because it requires, virtue is, in a sense, in a very essential sense, it is very, very different. It's very, very different from what we know as, for instance, what we know as, how do I put this, knowledge, right? Knowledge or science, right? Scientific knowledge, something like that, or theoretical knowledge. You see, the reason is because by virtue, for Socrates and Plato, and later on you will realize what it means when we get this, and we have a better understanding of Plato and Socrates through Aristotle, right? So, for virtue, according to Plato, would be, and he's telling this to Meno, is that, you see, it requires some sort of prudence. So what do we mean by prudence, right? So prudence is virtue. And by prudence, another synonym for prudence would be moderation, right? You don't go into two extremes, right? You don't be a spendthrift, right? Don't be a spendthrift, and also don't be a miser, right? Don't be miser and don't be spendthrift. And so in between, being a miser and being a spendthrift are the two extreme ends of a spectrum, right? And in the middle would be what? Moderation, or what you say as prudence, right? In other words, for instance, courage, right? Courage is a virtue, right? Why is it a virtue? Because courage is right smack in the middle between cowardly and recklessness, right? Recklessness is not courage. Cowardly is not courage, right? So those two are the extremes of a spectrum, and in the middle you find moderation. In other words, prudence, right? So we get this better understanding of Plato and Socrates through Aristotle. And so what Meno is saying, what Plato, Socrates is trying to make Meno understand is that you don't have prudence. In other words, you don't have virtue. You will never understand virtue, because virtue is prudence. And what is prudence? Moderation. And you, Meno, you don't have any moderation. You don't have any prudence. Precisely because you are too ambitious. You are very, very, very ambitious. You are extremely ambitious. In other words, you are extremely ambitious to the point of being reckless, right? So hence, because you are in that extreme, you will never understand what virtue is, right? Because you are in that extreme, for you, moderation or prudence would be cowardly, right? Would be miser. Right? Because you're that far away, and hence for you, anything that is not within your spectrum, within your end of the spectrum, anything else that is not that goes along with your interests is either bad, right? Is either bad or just stupid. For you, whatever you're doing is good. Everything else is just stupid. But in reality, you don't see, in your own ignorance, because you don't truly possess the knowledge about things which you claim to know, and because of your ignorance, you see that what you do is good, because you are too ambitious. You think that your ambition is good for you, but in reality, you don't know that it will harm you. And later on, you'll find that Meno gets harmed because of his Meno ultimately pays the price for his over ambition, right? He does. Meno is later killed by the Persian king, right? Because of his ambition. So same way. So Plato's Socrates was trying to make Meno understand that your ambition will get you nowhere. You think that your ambition is good for you, but in reality, in your ignorance, you don't know that it is bad for you, right? It is bad for you. So much in the same way, you can also imply that in real life, even in today's context, right? Sometimes you may think that, say for instance in politics, and even in your own life, right? Say for instance in politics, you may think that certain things are good for you. For instance, right? For instance, like whenever in 2017, there was a big protest here in Nagaland regarding the urban municipal body election, right? Where it was mentioned that 30% of the seats would be reserved for women, right? But then the whole society started not knowing anything about what it is. They have not even read what the law says, right? They have no clue what the bill says, and they have no clue what kind of advantage it will bring to the society. And in their own ignorance, right? In their own ignorance, holding their beliefs which have been passed on from generations, right? In their own ignorance, they protested. There was a big protest going on. There was a ban. In the end, some people lost their lives, right? For what? For nothing, right? They think that it was bad for them, but in reality, it was good for them. So much in the same way, sometimes you think that it's good for you, but it's bad for you. And some things which you think is bad for you is actually good for you. Much in the same way, whenever you take medicine is bad. It tastes horrible, but then ultimately it is good for you. Right? Medicine is good for you, even though at first it may seem bad, it is good for you. So much in the same way, even in politics, it's the same thing. Sometimes you may think that, for instance, in general election here in Nagaland, right? Here in Nagaland in 2018, there was an election, and there was a new party, right? There was a new party formed, NDBB, and then everybody thought, because now we have a new political party, this political party will be different from all the other parties we have had here in Nagaland, and hence this party will truly bring the change which they claim to bring, right? But in reality, because of our own ignorance, we did not realize that most of the politicians, most of the candidates who are part of the new party were actually the old politicians who have just switched, who have only switched places. They've left the old party and formed the new party. You see, so it's the same. Nothing is going to change. And then here we are in 2020. Nothing has changed. Everything is the same, if not worse, right? So there you go. So there you have it. We think that something is good, such as NDBB, right? But now we realize that it's the same as any other political party that we have had here in Nagaland, and things will always be the same. So there you go. There you have it. There's an example. There's a practical implication in today's society as well about what Plato, Socrates was talking about in 2,500 years ago, right? In Meno. So you see, this is precisely what it is. He was telling Meno that you can't understand virtue precisely because you don't have prudence. You don't have moderation. In other words, you are too ambitious, right? And we know this because when we talk about prudence, and when Plato, Socrates is talking about prudence and virtue, it is related to what we now know as the practical wisdom, right? The practical wisdom, the practical knowledge, and we have this understanding. We have this better understanding about Plato, Socrates' idea of virtue from Aristotle, because if you look at Aristotle's book 6 of his Nicomachean Ethics, you find that he talks about more practical wisdom, right, which is different from theoretical wisdom. You got my point, right? It's very, very different from theoretical wisdom. When I say theoretical wisdom and practical wisdom, I mean this. So, for instance, theoretical knowledge right? Would be, or theoretical wisdom or knowledge would be something like you having a knowledge of say for instance the stars, the moons, the solar system, right? Atoms and chemistry and biology, whatnot. That's theoretical knowledge. While practical wisdom would be something like say for instance being wise, right? Not just wise, being wise in the sense that knowing how to deal with people, knowing what to say at the right time, at the right moment to the right people, right? Those things. Knowing how to deal with difficult people, knowing how to deal with life, knowing how to deal with difficult situations, knowing how to deal with people in general, right? Knowing how to negotiate your way around. You see, those are practical wisdoms, right? Those are practical, every day-to-day wisdom, day-to-day knowledge. That's what practical knowledge is. By practical knowledge and practical wisdom, it just means day-to-day way of carrying things out in a very wise and prudent manner. So Plato gives us these two examples, right? Well, not two examples, but then Aristotle gives us these two examples. Plato, Socrates gives us these two examples of practical knowledge and theoretical knowledge. So for Plato, Socrates, Pericles, right, the great Athenian politician, the great Athenian statesman, the great Athenian himself, Pericles, he exemplified a person who has practical knowledge, i.e. wisdom, i.e. virtue, right? He is virtuous in the sense that he possesses practical knowledge, how to deal with people, how to negotiate with all these things. And another example for the theoretical knowledge was one of the pre-Socratic philosophers, Anaxagoras, right? He was one. So here you go. You have two examples: Pericles, exemplifying practical wisdom, and Anaxagoras, exemplifying theoretical knowledge. Now, when we talk about theoretical knowledge, it is a knowledge that aims to know all things, right? It is a knowledge that whose main purpose is to know all things. But practical wisdom, such as the one possessed by Pericles, right, is concerned with human good, with happiness. In other words, virtue is not about having all this knowledge of the books, right? I think that's the best way to say it. Yeah, having a book knowledge, that's not virtue, right? And it is true. I know this is true. This is very, very true. Just because you have a knowledge about the subject matter, book knowledge, just because you have a book knowledge, it does not make you a virtuous person. So a virtuous person or practical wisdom consists or is concerned primarily with human good, primarily with human happiness, right? And that's what Pericles possessed. Pericles possessed practical wisdom, practical knowledge. In other words, he was truly virtuous. Why? Because his actions were all concerned with human good, i.e., how do I make my society, Athens, how do I make Athens good? How do I bring about happiness for my fellow Athenians? Right? That was his main concern. His main concern was not the moon and the star and how much do I know about physics and chemistry and mathematics and science and whatnot. But how do I make, for Pericles, how do I make my citizens, my Athenian citizens good? How do I make my Athenians happy? Now, by happy, it means not a superficial happiness, such as, you may be a miser, right? For a miser person, whenever you have accumulated and hoard for yourself treasures, it makes you happy. That is happiness, but that is not true happiness. That's just a fool's paradise, right? However, a true happiness, a genuine happiness, would be the perfection of man, right? Perfection of human soul, right? Perfection of attaining wisdom, right? In other words, when we talk about perfection of man, I don't mean you must be perfect. No, like you must look perfect. No, it has nothing to do with outwardly appearance, all right? Just so you know, when we talk about the perfection of man, I don't mean anything that you must wear like this, you must be like. No, You must look like. It has nothing else. It has nothing to do with outward appearance. When we talk about Plato Socrates speaks of the perfection of man, or perfection of soul, perfection of wisdom. He means your inner self. Who are you? Be genuine. Know yourself. Put yourself in order. Right? Resolve all the unresolved issues within you. Right? Be prudent. Be moderate. Then you become virtuous. Then you are capable of understanding what virtue is. And then, only then will you possess what is known as wisdom or virtue. What is known as virtue. Right? So, and the only way, right? And the thing is this, and this is very important for you to know. And the only way that you can possess virtue, is not through anything else, right? This is very important. You can never be born virtuous, nor can virtue be taught. It is not teachable, right? And the only way you can be virtuous, i.e., the only way you can be prudent or moderate, or the only way you can possess the practical wisdom, right, is true, right? The only way you can understand and be virtuous is through philosophy, right? Is through philosophizing. It's only through philosophy. And when I say philosophy, I mean to think and to understand, right? To think and understand. Only then can you become virtuous. Because sometimes you do things, you carry out actions without even thinking, without even understanding your own emotions, without even understanding your own motivations behind what made you carry out those actions, those things, right? And who are you but a sum of your action, right? Sum of your behavior, an addition, right, of your behavior. You see, this is clearly exemplified. This is clearly indicated in a conversation in Plato's Meno, where Socrates has a conversation with another character called Anytus, right? And so he asks Anytus, you great Athenian, can you tell our fellow traveler and our fellow friend here, Meno, that if virtue is teachable? And Anytus says, yes, of course, virtue is teachable. You ask any Athenian, and then that any Athenian will make you into a virtuous person, right? In other words, what Anytus was saying was that if virtue is teachable, that means it's a kind of knowledge, because if it is a knowledge, then you can teach someone how to acquire knowledge, right? You can. In reality, yes, it is true. You can teach knowledge to anybody, but wisdom, virtue is not something that you can. But nevertheless, Anytus is saying, yes, of course, virtue is teachable. Any Athenian will teach men how to become a virtuous person. In other words, Anytus assumes that virtue is a kind of knowledge, right? Because if it is knowledge, it is teachable. And then if it is teachable, there must be a teacher of virtue, right? There must be a teacher of virtue. But then Socrates says, I don't think so, right? It is not teachable. You see, Anytus, virtue is not teachable, and any Athenian gentleman will not make Meno into a virtuous person, precisely because of this. You see, Plato Socrates brings up two examples, Pericles and Themistocles, right? These are the two great Athenians, right? Two great Athenians who possess virtue in absolute sense. You can say that, for instance, right? These are two virtuous, very, very virtuous men who are prudent, who are moderate, and who possess practical wisdom. But then look at the children, right? Look at the children. Their children are not virtuous. You see, even though the parents are virtuous, such as Pericles, Themistocles, even though they are virtuous, they are unable to make their children virtuous, right? You see, this is kind of true, right? You just say, for instance, imagine even nowadays, you don't even have to look far. Maybe look at your own family, or look at some well-known person from your community or whatnot, from your society or state. Say, for instance, your parents may be very, very virtuous, right? For instance, they may not be, but say, for instance, they are. Say, for instance, that you also know who you are. you also know whether you are virtuous or not, right? And say for instance you think that you are virtuous, but in reality you also know that you are not virtuous at all. And also look at your parents or your grandparents. Say for instance your parents are very, very virtuous. And look at you. Are you virtuous? If you're honest, you know that you're not virtuous, right? Your parents may have given you the best education, right? The best theoretical education, such as sending you to the school to learn, to universities to learn, to obtain degrees. But do you think obtaining degrees and high school degrees make you virtuous? Of course not. If that was the case, then almost everybody in the world today will be virtuous, because almost everybody in the world, right? Most people in the world do have some sort of university or school degrees, right? And if possessing those book knowledge or educational degrees makes you a virtuous person, then the world will be a very, very, very good place, right? But that is not the case, right? It is something very, very different. So much in the same way, your parents may be very, very virtuous, but you may not be. And who knows, you know very well you're not a virtuous person. And say, for instance, you are a very virtuous person yourself. And later on, whenever you do have families, whenever you do have, say, for instance, children, who knows, your children may be worse, right? Your children may grow up to be individuals who have no sense of virtue at all, right? You can see that even among some of your most prominent members of your family, right? Prominent members of your society, right? Say, for instance, you may know somebody who is very, very virtuous, very, very virtuous. But then look at the children. Are they virtuous? Right? You see? So, Socrates is telling Anytus that, you see, you cannot teach virtue, right? You cannot teach virtue because it is something that you have to attain by yourself. Being virtuous. It is something, it cannot be taught to you. You must come to realize and attain those things by yourself. And how do you attain that? How do you attain virtue? You must have some sense of noble in you. You must possess the quest for beautiful, the quest for the noble. When I say beautiful, I don't mean all the beautiful, okay? I don't mean the outwardly beautiful thing. I mean the noble, the high quality thing. Possessing high moral principles, all these things. Good quality, magnificent character. Those things are beautiful, right? So, you can only possess wisdom only when you possess that sense of beauty, that sense of nobility, that sense of noble, right? Only when you have that, then can you truly understand and do possess and do become a virtuous person. And that's why you cannot, and as we discussed last time, and that's why, and it is because in order for virtue to be teachable, knowledge, it must be teachable. But we now know that it's not teachable, right? Because there are no students. If there are no teachers, there are no students. And because there are no teachers, you cannot be taught. And hence, virtue is not knowledge. Virtue is not knowledge, right? Just because, say for instance, just because I know these things does not make me a virtuous person. Who knows? I may be the most selfish person in the world, right? You see? Just because I'm a teacher does not mean that I'm a virtuous person. I may be the most horrible person in the world. But who knows, you who are just learning these things, who don't have enough theoretical knowledge, may be a very, very virtuous person, right? Maybe a very virtuous person. And that's true. And that's the whole point. That's the whole point. Because the whole point of Plato's Socrates is that people who are not dedicated, right? People who are not dedicated to a life of learning and understanding can have a noble aspiration and are in a way noble men because of this love of beautiful in them. Right? There is this love of noble, love of beautiful in them that makes them very, very noble. In other words, you may see, for instance, because we live in India and we live in Nagaland and wherever else in Manipur or Assam, if you go to the village, right, go to the rural areas, to the old villages, and you'll find there who don't have any kind of educational degree, who have not even studied class 1, standard 1, and yet they are noble. They are more noble than you and me. They are more virtuous than you and me. Why? Because they are noble men. Why? Because they have in them this sense of beautiful in them that makes them noble. They have a noble aspiration, right? Noble aspiration, moderation, prudence, practical knowledge, right? They have this noble aspiration in them. And the only way they have this noble expression is because they have this sense of beauty, the sense of noble in them that makes them virtuous. So you see, so just because somebody has a degree, has a higher degree, does not make them a virtuous person. They may be the most horrible person in the world, right? While on the other hand, those who have no knowledge, I'm not saying all, I'm saying some who don't even have a proper education, may be the most noble man, right? Maybe a person of noble, maybe a person of virtue, right? And those things I cannot teach you how to be noble. Those things you cannot teach me how to be a noble person, how to be a virtuous person. I cannot teach you how to be a virtuous person. And that all requires, right? That all requires philosophizing or philosophy, i.e. to think and understand. And only when you start thinking, and only when you begin to understand, do you properly understand the issues that face your own life and also that faces the society in general. For instance, even in politics, you can't be a blind follower, right? You cannot be a blind follower. There must be something that once you begin to understand, once you begin to think how things are, then you begin to realize, oh, something is really seriously wrong with the way things are going on here, and that's why we need to change. That's why we need some sort of change in the way things are done around here. So those are the things that you can only achieve and attain only through thinking, right? And yeah, so there we go. So here we end with Meno, and next video lecture we're going to start with Plato's